was really scared. I think I cried all the way to the airport. I was so afraid of being exposed as an imposter and a poser. And yeah, I was really, really scared. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a beautiful snowy day in Hudson Valley, New York, and I thought it was the perfect day to talk about why I'm hooked on conferences. After all, going to a conferences on a day like this is absolutely perfect. There's no better time to focus on writing than when the snow is falling down or it's raining. Raining so hard you can't see. There's just something about the rhythm of the weather on those days that makes you want to go deep into your story world. So conferences, it never occurred to me. When I first started writing, I thought I would be a poet, a solo endeavor, if there ever was one. Eventually, I wrote plays, which was also a solo endeavor, although it became a collaborative effort eventually. And so when I started writing prose, when I started to think that, maybe a novel was something that I might want to explore, of course, I was going to write it on my own, totally on my own. Like I wrote all the plays, like I wrote all the poems. It would be what I did. And then miraculously, it would go out into the world. Anyway, it didn't work out that way. So there I was going down my writing path. I was 4 years in. I was getting ready to send my novel out. It wasn't anywhere near ready to go, but I was getting ready to send it out. And I was also really insecure about it. And I also felt, even though writing was a solo endeavor for me, as it is for most writers, I felt I really needed a group of people that could help me. I needed a writing critique group or some kind of community that would help me navigate how to move forward. And so I started searching online, not really knowing where to look or how, but I went hither and yon, and I came across Vermont League of Writers. This was fabulous. Vermont was not that far away, and it was open to all writers, every level, and you didn't have to be a Vermont resident. That was very appealing to me. And so I thought, well, I'll join, but first maybe I'll try it out. And they had this workshop. It was a one-day workshop where they had speakers come in and talk. And one of the speakers was Chuck Sambuchino, who is a writer and a former editor of Writer's Digest magazine, who you may know from his wonderful research and blog about literary agents. And he was doing a workshop on submissions. Well, thank you, universe. This is perfectly timed for me. So I signed up, and if you were quick enough, you could submit your first 10 pages, your first chapter, ahead of time, and Chuck Sambuchino would read it, and then he would provide feedback during that workshop. So I did it. I signed up. I sent my first chapter in. I was all excited, and everyone was really lovely. It was a small, welcoming community. It was a day of information. Chuck's workshop on submissions was wonderful. He answered all these questions, and while other speakers were going, he was meeting one-on-one with the people who had submitted their work. And when we went, and he gave me this wonderful feedback, and he even looked at my query letter, which was very, very helpful. And right at the end of our session, he said, "Why aren't you going to conferences? You need to be going to conferences." And I didn't really have an answer to that. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, the reason I haven't been going to conferences is because, conferences just haven't been in my consciousness yet, number one. But number two is, golly, could I? I'm not really a writer, am I? Yeah, that's what I thought. Big poser complex. But anyway, I got so much out of Chuck's blog, The Guide to Literary Agents, and so much out of that workshop. And his feedback was so helpful and encouraging, very encouraging, that I thought, yeah, I can trust him. I need to go to conferences. Why aren't I going to conferences? Why aren't you going to conferences, Jacosa? So I started doing research on conferences. All the ones I was interested in, of course, were like in different countries and cost a lot of money. And I didn't have any of those things, nor did I have the time to go. And then I came across an interview between Chuck and an agent from the August agency. And Jeff McGraw, who unfortunately is no longer there, he went on and on and on about one conference in particular, and that was the Surrey International Writers Conference outside of Vancouver, Canada. And he just said it's his favorite conference of all the conferences that he went to, and he highly recommended it. And I went on the August agency and I looked at his bio and I thought, oh my gosh, we are like two peas in a pod. He and I would get along famously. I really wanted to query him. And so I said, I'm going to go to the Surrey International Writers Conference. And so I did. And I was I was really scared. I think I cried all the way to the airport. I was so afraid of being exposed as an imposter and a poser. And yeah, I was really, really scared. And I went, and I continued to be really, really scared, but it was overwhelming to say the least. I mean, it was one session after another, and I realized in the biggest way possible that I knew absolutely nothing about writing. I realized that I had submitted to agents and my manuscript wasn't anywhere near ready. I had made like every mistake in the book. I couldn't believe I did that. But of course I did, because I didn't know anything, because I had never gone to conferences before, because I didn't really have a critique group. I didn't have a community of writers. I didn't know. And gosh, it was so fabulous to learn. I mean, one workshop after another. There were so many workshops. I wanted to take them all and I couldn't. And so I just went to every single one. I talked to as many of the agents as possible. I talked to as many of the authors and editors who could give feedback on my pages as possible. And the Surrey International Writers Conference was the conference that really got me hooked. I just learned that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know what you're doing and you need to learn more. And isn't that the most wonderful thing about writing? It's that the more you learn, the more skills you acquire, the more you recognize that you can do better, that you can ramp up your skills. You can bolster that toolbox. You can always grow. And anyways, it was phenomenal. It was so overwhelming that by the end of the 4 days that I was there, I didn't fly out until the following day. I just went up to my hotel room and I lay down on the bed and I just stared at the ceiling for like 2 hours. I just didn't know what to process first. It was incredible. So Surrey was really the beginning. I went in 2008, I went in 2009, I went in 2010, and then I said, I want to try something different. And in my internet research, I stumbled upon the Backspace community, which was a wonderful forum for writers. And they had an annual conference that took place in New York City. And I thought, golly gee, how convenient. And so I went down to the Backspace conference. And sure enough, that first year, who happened to be teaching a workshop, the Breakout Novel Workshop? None other than Donald Moss. And at the time, I was feeling rather low about my writing. The querying process was not going well. The feedback that particular morning I got from 2 sets of agents wasn't encouraging either. And so I went to the workshop with Donald Moss and I thought, okay, whatever. And guess what? Donald Moss delivered exactly what I needed to hear. By the end of his workshop, I realized that the story I was writing was off the mark. He showed me that I was resisting the story that I needed to tell. He nudged me to start all over, and so I did. So Donald Moss, I meet him in Surrey. I meet him again at Backspace. And then following him from the time I met him in Surrey, he introduced me to the Writer Unboxed community. Writer Unboxed is this fabulous, inspirational writing community online. Every single day, they have a post by authors and writers all about the craft. And it is an anchor in my writing life every day. Whenever you think that, oh gosh, no, I don't even want to think about it anymore. And then a post comes up in my mailbox and you read it and you say, gosh, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And so I started reading Writer Unboxed every single day. Donald had a monthly post, and sure enough, Writer Unboxed decided that they were going to have a conference as well. And so in 2014, I went to Salem, Massachusetts, and I participated in the first Writer Unboxed Uncon. And it was exactly what I needed. During those 4 days, I was able to face the truth about the themes that I was writing it. I was able to recognize that I actually had themes, that I actually had a point of view, that I had particular stories that I needed to tell, stories that were unique to me and didn't have anything to do with anybody else, stories that only I could tell. I found that out through the workshops that I took, and that gave me a whole new reason to recommit to my writing life. And then I went back in 2016 and I was introduced to Lisa Cron's Story Genius method. And I was in awe. The way that she thought about the stories was nothing like I ever thought before. It was structure through inspiration. It just resonated with me. And she gave us an assignment and I wrote in a fever. I wrote in a fever for 2 hours, and I had an origin story of a character that came out of I don't know where. And I realized that I wasn't a one-hit wonder, that even though I had been working on this particular story that takes place in New Orleans ever since I started writing, I had a whole slew of stories that I wanted to tell. And thanks to Lisa Cron's Story Genius method, I had a handle on how to excavate them. I was a bona fide writer with stories to tell, multiple stories, and I needed to get to it. And so I did. And then in 2019, I had started a memoir, and I had reached a point where I wasn't sure how to meld the past and the present. And so I was just sort of like, I don't know. And so I thought, well, I'll just put it on pause, and then I'll go to the Writer Unboxed conference and I'll see what happens. And maybe I'll learn something that can help me with the memoir. And I went to the Writer Unboxed conference and I had this enormously invigorating session with writer Barbara O'Neill. Her novels are from the heart and they deal with strong women who love to cook and love the outdoors, and they're all about healing and rebirth, and they're well worth your time. And she did this workshop that incorporated writing and music and then building a collage. And we worked on it, and here is the result. That is the collage of my memoir. And I can't really tell you, can't really put it into words, but that's it. That is my memoir. And as soon as I did that, I thought, I don't really know what this means, but it works. It just brought all the pieces of my memoir together. I was able to go back and finish it, thanks to Barbara O'Neill, thanks to Writer Unboxed Uncon. And then COVID hit. So there wasn't any in-person Uncon. But in 2022, we had a virtual Uncon. And it was 3 weeks, I think, stretched out. And it was just as invigorating. It was just as invigorating. And that is where I met Julie Julie Duffy, the amazing Julie Duffy from Story a Day podcast, who is an anchor for just committing to a writing life and really honoring yourself and giving yourself a good pat on the back for a job well done. And Julie Duffy led me to my chimes of victory. And I needed that. Also, during the 2022 OnCon, I added more tools to my toolbox. Different ways of approaching a chapter or a story idea. Ways of experimentation, because I'm ready for that now. It's not about necessarily the rules as much as exploring my own method. And that's wonderful. But the most important thing that came to me during last year's OnCon was that when I first started going to conferences, I felt so isolated, so alone, and I was so insecure. And I desperately wanted to have a group of people, a group of friends that could cheer me on, that would be my buddies for life. You know, those best friends forever that I really don't like that expression, but I just was looking for that in my writing. And during the virtual OnCon, I just looked around virtually and I realized that my writing buddies are right there. The Writer Unbox community has become my cheerleaders. I have an enormous community of writers supporting me. I am ever so grateful for them. And it all began because I was willing to take the leap and go to my very first conference. So if you are starting out, no matter what age you are, if you are just taking a step forward to commit to a writing life, you are writing that first story, that first novel, that first screenplay, whatever it is, if you are ready to commit to that and want to honor your desire to write stories that you will be able to share with the world, then one of the first priorities you need to do is to get yourself to a conference. It will not only build your toolbox, it will expand your imagination, and you'll find the cheerleading community that will carry you all the way through to the day that you publish your novel. Happy writing.